Welcome if you dare. You've stepped into a world where shadows whisper, where every creak in the floor holds a secret. And tonight, you're about to hear a story that will haunt your dreams. Before we begin, make sure you're not alone, or you're ready to uncover what really happened in today's story. Don't forget to subscribe if you're brave enough, because what lurks in this channel is far more terrifying. Let's begin.
The undying Granny Moira's cursed rain lashed against the window pane of the old inn. The wearied traveler, like frantic fingers trying to claw their way in. Elara Finch shivered, pulling her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Black Hollow wasn't just a village. It was a place forgotten by time and sunlight, nestled deep within the shadowed embrace of the Grimshaw Woods. The air hung heavy with damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, an unspoken dread that permeated the very stones of the cottages. Elara and her younger brother, Ben, just 8 years old, wide-eyed and still trusting, had arrived only that afternoon. Their parents, seeking a fresh start after a series of misfortunes in the city, had purchased the dilapidated Hollow's End cottage on the village outskirts. It was cheap, unnervingly so, but desperation had clouded their judgment. The villagers had watched their arrival with hooded eyes, their greetings curt, their gazes flickering uneasily towards the looming hill at the north end of the valley. Perched precariously on its crest, visible even through the downpour, stood Moira's keep. It wasn't a castle, but an imposing, Gothic monstrosity of dark stone, its windows like empty, accusing sockets. Smoke, thick and unnaturally black, curled from a single chimney, defying the torrential rain. "Don't stray far," Elara, her mother, Martha, had whispered, her voice tight with a fear she couldn't name. "Especially not towards the hill." Why? Elara, 17 and naturally curious, had pressed out her father, Thomas, a weary man whose optimism had been worn thin, had interjected. "Just old village superstition. Pet, probably just a ruin. Now, help your mother unpack." But superstition felt like the bedrock of Black Hollow. That evening, seeking firewood in the cramped kitchen, Elara overheard the innkeeper, Mr. Hargrave, a man with a face like crumpled leather, speaking low and urgent to a grizzled farmer. "Saw the light again last night, Jed, up in the top window, flickering like..." Jed spat into the hearth, the sizzle unnaturally loud. "And the Miller lad's still missing. Vanished 3 nights past, near the old oak on the boundary path. Folk are saying she's hungry again." Mr. Hargrave shuddered, casting a furtive glance around. "Hush, man. Don't speak of her. Walls have ears, and the woods listen." "Who?" Elara couldn't stop herself from asking, stepping out of the shadows. Both men jumped, their faces paling. "Mr. Hargrave forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just local tales, miss. Pay no mind. Best forgotten." He quickly changed the subject, offering her a basket of kindling. Later, as the family settled into their damp, unfamiliar cottage, Ben pressed his face against the grimy window, overlooking the valley. "Who lives in the big scary house?" Elara joined him, looking up at Moira's keep, now a brooding silhouette against the stormlit sky. "I don't know, Ben. Maybe no one. Old Granny Moira lives there," Ben said matter-of-factly. "Billy from the inn told me. He said she's been there forever and ever. He said she doesn't die. He said she eats bad children." He giggled nervously, not quite believing it, but the seed was planted. That night, sleep was elusive for Elara. The wind howled like a tormented soul around the eaves, and the unfamiliar sounds of the ancient woods, creaking branches, the screech of an owl, The rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth kept her tense. She heard her parents murmuring anxiously in the next room, their words indistinct but their fear palpable. Then, just before dawn, a sound cut through the storm's fury, a high, thin, unearthly wail that seemed to come from the direction of the hill. It wasn't an animal. It was the sound of pure, ancient malice. It echoed through the valley, silencing even the wind for a terrifying moment before fading away. Ben whimpered in his sleep. Elara's blood ran cold. Granny Moira. The name hung in the suffocating darkness. No longer a childish tale, but a chilling, undeniable presence. The undying and Black Hollow belonged to her. The morning dawned gray and sodden, the storm having washed the world clean but leaving behind a heavier dampness, a residue of the night's terror. News spread through Black Hollow like creeping frost. Young Timothy Miller had been found. Not alive, not whole. His body lay twisted and broken at the base of the ancient sentinel oak, which marked the boundary between the village proper and the overgrown path leading towards Moira's keep. The official word, muttered by the pale-faced constable, was a tragic fall, but the villagers knew. The unnatural angle of his neck, the look of utter, frozen horror etched onto his small face, and the strange, almost ritualistic placement of his hands. None of it spoke of an accident. Elara saw the covered stretcher being carried back into the village, the grim procession passing their cottage. The silence that followed was thicker than the fog clinging to the ground. Fear, cold and sharp, settled over Black Hollow like a shroud. Her parents tried to maintain normalcy. Thomas set about patching the leaky roof, his movements stiff with suppressed anxiety. Martha scrubbed the cottage floors with a frantic energy, trying to wash away the pervasive sense of wrongness. Ben was kept firmly indoors. His questions about Timothy met with evasive answers and tightened lips. Curiosity, however, was a relentless beast within Elara. The whispers, the fear, the palpable evil emanating from the hill. It drew her like a moth to a deadly flame. She needed to understand. One afternoon, under the pretext of gathering wildflowers, she slipped away, her path instinctively curving towards the sentinel oak. The tree was monstrous, its gnarled branches clawing at the sky, its trunk thick with moss and scarred by time. The air around it was unnaturally still and cold. At its base, where Timothy had been found, the earth was dark and disturbed. Elara knelt, not touching but peering closely. Amongst the churned mud and fallen leaves, she saw it, faint but unmistakable under the weak sunlight, the imprint of a single, bare foot. It was large, grotesquely elongated, the toes ending in points that dug deep into the soil. It looked impossibly old, yet freshly made. A shudder racked her body. "You shouldn't be here, girl," Elara gasped, scrambling back. An old man stood a few feet away, leaning heavily on a gnarled walking stick. He was thin to the point of emaciation, his clothes ragged, but his eyes, deep-set and startlingly blue, held a fierce intelligence and an ancient weariness. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, etched deep by hardship and secrets. Who are you?" Elara stammered, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Silas Thorne," he rasped, "keeper of forgotten things. And you're the Finch girl, stirring up trouble where it sleeps deep." He gestured towards the footprint with his stick. "See that? That's her mark. Moira's. She walks when she hungers, when she needs feeding. Feeding. What does that mean? What is she?" The questions tumbled out. Silas's gaze swept towards the brooding shape of the keep on the hill. Death cheated her. Girl, centuries ago, found something unnatural, a bargain struck in shadow and blood. She draws life, you see, sucks the vitality, the youth, the very soul from the living, especially the young, the vibrant. It's the only thing that sustains her cursed existence. That's why she doesn't die. That's why she must feed." His voice dropped to a chilling whisper, and Timothy Miller paid the price for the village's complacency. Complacency. "What do you mean?" Elara felt a surge of anger amidst her terror. Silas looked at her, a profound sadness in his ancient eyes. "Black Hollow has a pact with the devil, girl, an unspoken one. We leave her be. We pretend she doesn't exist. We offer her quiet, and in return, she mostly preys on outsiders, travelers, the lost. Sometimes when the pickings are slim, or when she's particularly hungry, or when the village forgets its place, she takes one of ours, a sacrifice to keep the greater evil at bay." Elara stared at him, horrified. "You let her murder people. We survive." Silas snapped, his voice cracking. "You think we like it? You think the weight doesn't crush us, but Moira, she protects us too, from what lurks beyond the Grimshaw Woods. Things far worse than a hungry crone, things that make her look almost human. That's the good in her, if you can call it that, the monstrous bargain. She's our warden and our curse." The revelation hit Elara like a physical blow. The good was a monstrous protection racket. The village lived under the suffocating thumb of this undying horror, sacrificing innocents to preserve their own lives from an even greater, unseen evil. The footprint seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. As she stared at it, a shadow fell across the clearing, not from a cloud, but something large and swift moving through the trees, high above the path towards the keep. A sense of being watched, of ancient, predatory eyes fixed upon her, froze her blood solid. Silas grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Run, girl, back to the village, now." They fled, the unnatural silence of the woods broken only by their frantic footsteps, and the chilling sensation of pursuit from the shadows above. Elara didn't look back. She knew Granny Moira had marked her. Life in Black Hollow became a tense, silent vigil. The shadow of Timothy Miller's death and Elara's encounter at the Sentinel Oak hung heavy over the Finch family. Thomas worked with grim determination on the cottage, his knuckles white on his tools. Martha jumped at every creak and groan of the old house, her eyes perpetually darting towards the window facing the hill. Ben became withdrawn, plagued by nightmares where a figure with glowing eyes and impossibly long fingers chased him through endless dark woods. Elara, ostracized by the villagers who blamed her for stirring things up after Silas confirmed her presence at the oak, spent her days exploring the safer fringes of the Grimshaw Woods near the cottage, searching for herbs, sketching the twisted trees, and trying to make sense of the impossible. She felt a constant prickle on the back of her neck, the sensation of being watched. Sometimes she caught fleeting glimpses of movement, a shadow detaching itself from a tree trunk, a flicker of gray rags vanishing behind a thicket. Silas's words echoed. She walks when she hungers. One damp afternoon, while searching for mushrooms near a moss-covered stone wall marking the edge of their property, Elara heard it. At first, it was just the wind sighing through the pines. Then it coalesced into a voice, thin, rasping, and ancient, seeming to emanate from the very stones themselves. Pretty little bird flitting so close to the cage, sweet blood, young blood, feeds the ache. Elara froze, her breath catching in her throat. The voice was inside her head and outside, all around her. It dripped with a vile hunger. The brother tender morsel sleep so soundly easy picking, no. Elara gasped aloud, clapping her hands over her ears, though it did nothing to block the psychic intrusion. "Leave him alone." A dry, crackling chuckle echoed. "Or what? Little bird, will you peck at me? Fly away, fly far, or watch the nestlings fall." The voice faded, leaving behind a ringing silence and a cold sweat on Elara's skin. It was a direct threat against Ben. Panic surged through her. She sprinted back to the cottage, bursting through the door. Ben was sitting at the rough-hewn table, coloring with broken crayons. He looked up, startled. "Alara, what's wrong? You look scary." She grabbed him in a fierce hug. "Nothing, Ben. Just stay close to me. Okay? Promise?" He nodded, confused but sensing her fear. Martha came in from the small pantry, wiping her hands. "Alara, what is it?" Alara hesitated. Telling them about the voice would sound like madness. They were barely holding on as it was. I thought I saw a wolf," she lied, her voice trembling. Near the stone wall, Martha's face paled. Thomas, who had come in from repairing a fence, frowned. "Wolves haven't been seen near the village in years." "You sure?" "Lass, positive," Alara insisted, her mind racing. She needed help. She needed Silas. She needed to understand how to fight back. That night, the whispering began in earnest, not just for Alara. Then, insidious murmurs seeped through the cracks in the cottage walls, under the doors like cold smoke. Martha woke, screaming, convinced spiders were crawling all over her. Thomas swore he heard scratching inside the chimney, a sound like long nails on stone. Ben cried, saying an old lady with no face was standing in the corner of his room, just watching. Sleep became impossible. The cottage, their supposed refuge, felt like a trap closing in. Driven by desperation, Alara sought out Silas Thorne. The next day, she found him in his ramshackle hut on the very edge of the village, bordering the forbidden woods. The hut smelled of herbs, damp earth, and old paper. Strange symbols were chalked faintly on the doorframe. "She's targeting my family," Alara stated without preamble, her voice raw. The whispers, the threats against Ben, the fear in our home. "How do we stop her?" Silas stirred a pot of foul-smelling stew over a small fire. "Stop her, girl. You don't stop Moira. You endure. You hide. You pray she looks elsewhere. That's not good enough." Alara slammed her fist on his rickety table. "She threatened my brother. She's in our house." Silas sighed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. She enjoys the terror. It seasons the meal, she says." He looked at her, his blue eyes piercing. "She knows you have spirit. She finds you interesting. That's dangerous. But it might also be a sliver of hope." "Hope? How?" "She's old, Alara. Impossibly old. And the thing that sustains her, it's not perfect. It requires constant feeding. It leaves traces. Weaknesses born of the unnatural life she clings to." He rummaged in a chest bound with iron straps, pulling out a brittle, leather-bound book. Its pages were yellowed, filled with cramped, spidery handwriting and unsettling diagrams. "This belonged to my great-grandfather. He studied her, obsessed over her, paid for it with his sanity and his life. But he learned things." He opened the book to a page depicting a complex, geometric symbol drawn in what looked like dried blood. "This is a ward of binding, not strong enough to stop her, but potent enough to repel her influence from a small space, a room, perhaps. It needs to be drawn with salt mixed with rowan ash and vervain, under a waning moon, and it requires a drop of blood from one who stands against her. Your blood, Alara." Alara stared at the symbol, a sense of dread warring with a fierce determination. "It will protect Ben. Our house. It will make it distasteful, like a bitter herb. It might buy you time, but it marks you. Girl, it tells her you're fighting back. She won't like that." Silas's gaze was grave. "Are you sure?" Alara thought of Ben's terrified face, of the whispers in the walls, of the monstrous footprint. She met Silas's eyes. "Tell me what to do." As she left Silas's hut with the instructions burned into her mind, and a small pouch of the necessary ingredients, She felt the weight of the keep's gaze intensify. The battle lines were drawn. She had challenged the undying. Now, she had to prepare for the storm. The waning moon hung like a sliver of tarnished silver in the ink-black sky, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. Inside Hollow's End Cottage, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The whispers had escalated to faint, mocking laughter that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. Objects moved slightly when no one was looking, a cup shifting on the table, a picture frame tilting askew. Ben refused to sleep alone, clinging to Elara or Martha, his small body trembling constantly. Thomas paced, his face drawn, the helplessness gnawing at him. Elara waited until her family was as settled as possible in the main room. Huddled near the meager fire, Martha had managed to coax Ben into a fitful sleep on her lap. Thomas stared blankly into the flames, with her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Elara slipped quietly into Ben's small bedroom. She locked the door behind her, the simple click sounding unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. Using the moonlight filtering through the grimy window, she emptied Silas's pouch onto the floor, fine salt gray ash from the sacred rowan tree, and dried, pungent vervain leaves, following the intricate pattern from the book memorized after hours of study by candlelight. She began to trace the ward of binding onto the bare wooden floorboards. Around Ben's bed, the mixture felt gritty and strangely warm under her fingers. As she completed the complex geometric design, interwoven with ancient runes of protection, she felt a faint thrum of energy emanating from the lines. It was a fragile, flickering hope. Now came the hard part. She took the small, sharp knife Silas had given her, its blade etched with minute symbols. Taking a deep breath, she pricked her fingertip. A single, ruby-red bead of blood welled up. Holding her breath, she let it fall onto the central point of the ward. The effect was immediate and startling. The ward flared with a soft, silver light, so brief it could have been an illusion. A low, discordant hum filled the room, vibrating through the floorboards and up Elara's legs. From somewhere deep within the house, or perhaps from the very hill itself, came a shriek of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a sound that scraped against the soul, filled with the fury of the ancient, and defied. The whispering in the walls cut off abruptly, replaced by an intense, listening silence. Elara slumped back against the door, trembling. It had worked, at least for now. The oppressive atmosphere in the room lifted slightly, replaced by a fragile bubble of calm. The sense of being watched directly diminished. She stayed in the room that night, curled up on the floor beside Ben's bed within the boundary of the ward. Sleep was impossible. She listened to the unnatural silence outside the door, broken only by the distant, furious shrieks echoing down from Moira's keep. Granny Moira knew, and she was incandescent with rage. The next morning, the cottage felt different. Lighter. The whispers were gone. Ben woke up without nightmares for the first time since they'd arrived. Martha and Thomas, though still exhausted and weary, noticed the shift. Thomas remarked that the scratching in the chimney had stopped. Martha said she hadn't felt the crawling sensation. "Did you do something, Elara?" Martha asked hesitantly over a sparse breakfast. Glancing towards Ben's room, Elara met her mother's eyes, seeing a flicker of desperate hope. "I found an old protection charm in the woods. A circle of special stones. I put it near Ben's bed." It was a half-truth, easier to swallow than blood magic in wards. A fragile sense of relief settled over the Finch family. For a few days, they dared to breathe. Elara ventured back to Silas to report the ward's success. The old man looked grimly satisfied. "Bought you time, girl. But she'll be looking for a way around it, or a way to draw you out. Be vigilant." Her cunning is as ancient as her evil. His warning proved prophetic. A week after the ward was cast, a new kind of horror visited Black Hollow. Old Man Peters, a reclusive farmer who lived closest to the path up to the keep, was found in his barn. He hadn't been drained like Timothy Miller. He had been changed. His body was contorted, his limbs elongated and twisted like gnarled branches. His skin was gray and hard like bark. His eyes were wide open, milky white, and his mouth was frozen in a silent scream. Most horrifying of all, his body was covered in a lattice of fine, dark roots that seemed to have grown into him from the packed earth floor, anchoring him in place. The village was paralyzed with a new kind of terror. This wasn't just feeding. This was desecration. This was a display of power, a reminder that Moira's reach extended beyond mere death. She could twist life itself. Silas examined the body from a distance, his face ashen. The blight, he whispered to Elara, who had followed the terrified whispers to the barn's edge. She's punishing the village, punishing me for helping you. She's reminding us what happens when the pact frays, when defiance stirs. He looked at Elara, his eyes filled with a terrible knowledge. The protection around your brother is strong, but it's tied to this place, to the land she infests. If she blights the land around your cottage, the ward could fail. Elara stared at the monstrous shape that had once been Old Man Peters, then up at the keep, where a single, baleful light now burned constantly in the highest window. Granny Moira wasn't just hungry. She was vengeful. And the fragile safety Elara had won for Ben was now under siege from the very earth beneath their feet. The war had escalated. The grotesque fate of Old Man Peters cast a new, suffocating pall over Black Hollow. Fear curdled into a near-paralyzing dread. The villagers retreated further into their homes, boarding windows, muttering prayers that sounded more like pleas for a quick end. The constable, his face the color of sour milk, declared it a bizarre fungal infection and ordered the barn burned. The acrid smoke that hung over the village for days did nothing to cleanse the air of terror. It only smelled like another kind of funeral pyre for Elara and her family. The horror was immediate and personal. Silas's warning echoed constantly in her mind. If she blights the land around your cottage, the ward could fail. She spent hours patrolling the perimeter of their small property, her eyes scanning the ground, the trees, the very air for signs of corruption. It began subtly, at the edge of the clearing where the stone wall marked the boundary with the deeper woods. The vibrant green moss started turning an ashen gray. The wild flowers Elara had once gathered withered overnight, their petals crumbling to dust at the slightest touch. Then, the earth itself began to change. Patches near the wall became unnaturally dark and spongy, emitting a faint, sickly sweet odor of decay, that warred with the usual damp woodland scent. One morning, Elara found the first root, thick, black, and pulsing faintly like a diseased vein. It had breached the surface near the corner of their vegetable patch. It seemed to writhe slowly, questing towards the cottage. When she touched it with a stick, it recoiled with a leathery rasp, leaving behind a smear of viscous, dark fluid on the wood. Revulsion choked her. She showed Silas. He poked at the root with his staff, his expression grim. It's begun. The blight seeks the ward's anchor, the land beneath your home. It will try to corrupt it, to weaken the symbol's connection to the natural world Moira perverts. How do we stop it? Elara's voice was tight with desperation. Ben played nearby, oblivious, building a fort with sticks. The sight of his innocence, amidst the encroaching horror, was a knife to her heart. Fire can slow it, Silas rasped. Purifying fire, blessed if you can manage it. Salt still holds some power, but it's like throwing sand against the tide. Now she's focused her malice here. You must protect the ground immediately around the cottage. Dig a trench. Fill it with salt and ash. Burn the roots where you find them. Pray it's enough. It became a grim routine. Thomas, his face set in lines of grim determination, dug a shallow trench around their cottage. Elara and Martha filled it with their precious, dwindling store of salt, mixed with ashes from their hearth and the rowan branches Silas provided. They worked under a sky that seemed perpetually overcast, the light weak and gray. The air grew colder, unnaturally so for the season, carrying the constant, faint stench of the blight. The roots multiplied. They surfaced like malignant worms, thicker, darker, converging relentlessly on the cottage. Elara and Thomas fought them daily, hacking with axes and shovels, dousing the severed ends with lamp oil and setting them ablaze. The roots burned with an unnatural greenish flame and emitted high-pitched, almost animalistic shrieks as they curled and blackened. The viscous fluid they bled stained the earth and smelled like rancid meat and spoiled earth. The ward inside Ben's room began to show signs of strain. The silver lines, once faintly luminous in moonlight, now seemed duller, scratched. The hum it emitted was weaker, more erratic. The oppressive feeling of being watched returned, stronger now, mixed with a chilling sense of amusement. Elara could almost feel Granny Moira's satisfaction as her corruption ate away at their defenses. Ben felt it too. He became listless, prone to sudden, inexplicable fevers. He complained of bad dreams, not just a faceless woman now, but dreams of dark, winding tunnels beneath the earth, and a voice that sounded like roots grinding together, calling his name. Ben Come Play Come Grow Martha rarely left his side, her eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear. One night, a new horror manifested. Elara woke to a frantic scrabbling sound beneath the cottage floorboards. It was accompanied by a wet, tearing sound, as if something large and determined was burrowing through the very foundations. She grabbed the oil lamp and rushed to Ben's room. Martha was already there, clutching a terrified Ben. The ward pulsed erratically, like a dying heartbeat. The floorboards vibrated. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. Thomas burst in, axe in hand. It's under the house. Trying to get in. They huddled together in Ben's room, the circle of salt and ash outside seeming pitifully inadequate against the monstrous force assaulting their home. The burrowing grew louder, more frantic. A floorboard near the door suddenly splintered upwards, revealing a glimpse of glistening, pulsating black root tendril, thicker than a man's arm, covered in hooked barbs. Ben screamed, a sound of pure, primal terror. Martha fainted. Thomas raised the axe, his face a mask of rage and terror. Elara grabbed the pouch of salt and ash, hurling its contents at the ruptured floorboards. The root recoiled violently, hissing like a nest of vipers. A wave of putrid stench filled the room, but it didn't retreat far. It writhed just below, the broken wood, probing, testing the weakened barrier of the ward and the trench outside. The message was clear. Their sanctuary was breached. The blight was inside the perimeter. The ward was failing Dot as dawn's weak light filtered through the window. The burrowing ceased. The root remained visible, a monstrous, throbbing intrusion. In their home, a symbol of Granny Moira's relentless power. The trench outside was a mess of churned, blackened earth and the charred remains of smaller roots. The blight hadn't won yet, but it had gained a terrifying foothold. Elara looked from the monstrous root to her brother's pale, feverish face. They couldn't stay. They couldn't win by hiding. They had to take the fight to the source, before the blight consumed Ben and everything they loved. The path led, up the hill, to Moira's keep. It was a suicide mission, but the only choice left. The monstrous root piercing their floorboard was the final obscenity. It lay dormant now, a grotesque, pulsating scar in their home, a constant reminder that the earth itself was turning against them. Ben's fever spiked, his skin clammy, his eyes glazed. He babbled about the rude lady calling him, promising cool earth and sweet darkness. Martha, hovering over him, looked like a ghost herself. Thomas stood guard over the rupture, axe clutched in white-knuckled hands, his face etched with a helpless fury that mirrored Elora's own. They couldn't endure another night. The ward was flickering, its protective hum reduced to a faint, dying buzz. The Blight was winning. "We have to leave," Elora stated, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror coiling in her gut. "Tonight, before dark." Thomas looked at her, then at the root, then at his unconscious wife and delirious son. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a profound despair. "Leave to where? Elora, the village won't take us in. They blame us for this, for stirring her up. In the woods," he shuddered. "The woods are hers. Not all of them," Elora said, thinking of Silas's hut on the edge. "We go to Silas. He knows the old path. He knows what we might need to do." She didn't voice the terrifying conclusion she'd reached. Appeasement. The pact Silas had spoken of. Perhaps the village's survival depended on offering Moira what she craved. The thought made her physically ill, but Ben's ragged breathing was a knife twisting in her soul. Thomas saw the unspoken horror in her eyes. He understood. His shoulders slumped. "No," he whispered. But it was a plea, not a refusal. "We have no choice, Father," Elora said, the words ash in her mouth. "We try to run. The Blight or her creatures will take Ben before we reach the village boundary. We stay, he dies tonight, or worse." She looked at the root. Silas might know another way, a way to bargain. The journey to Silas's hut, just before dusk, was a nightmare. They moved like hunted animals, carrying Ben wrapped in blankets. Martha supported between Thomas and Elora. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every creak of a branch, felt like the approach of death. The Blight was visible now, patches of gray, dead earth radiating out from their cottage, black roots snaking just beneath the surface like serpents. The air grew colder with every step away from their doomed home. Silas was waiting, as if expecting them. His hut felt like the last outpost before a poisoned wilderness. He took one look at Ben's feverish state and the terror on Martha and Thomas's faces, and ushered them inside. After hearing their terse account of the night's assault, he sighed, the sound like stones grinding together. "The ward is broken. The land is corrupted around your home. She's tasted your defiance, Elora, and found it stimulating. She wants the boy now. Not just his life, but his spirit to twist it, like Peter's, to make him part of her garden." He gestured towards Ben. "The fever is her call. It will worsen the closer she gets, or the closer he gets to her domain. We have to give her something else." Martha sobbed, clutching Ben. "Something to satisfy her. Please, Silas. There must be a way." Silas's ancient eyes held profound sorrow. "There's the pact, the old way, an offering, freely given, to appease her hunger and redirect her wrath." "An offering?" Thomas asked hoarsely. "What kind life?" Silas said flatly. "Vibrant life. Usually an outsider, someone lost." Or his gaze swept over them, lingering on Thomas. "Someone who volunteers. A sacrifice made with purpose, to break her focus on the boy." A heavy silence descended, broken only by Ben's whimpers. The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Thomas looked at his wife, at his son, then at Elora. A terrible resolve hardened his features. He straightened his shoulders. "Me, no," Martha cried, clutching his arm. "Thomas, no. It's the only way," Thomas said, his voice rough but firm. He looked at Silas. "What do I do?" Elara felt the world tilt. This couldn't be happening. Her father couldn't. There has to be another way. "Silas, the source. You said she has a weakness. Tied to the church. We go there. We destroy it." Silas shook his head, a gesture of infinite weariness. "The church is deep within her territory. Now, girl, guarded by things born of the blight. You wouldn't get within a mile of it, and even if you did, destroying it would break the pact entirely. The things she keeps out, they would come in. The sacrifice, it buys time. Time for you to get away, far from Black Hollow. Time for the village to endure another generation under her shadow." Thomas placed a calloused hand on Elara's shoulder. "Listen to him, Elara. Get your mother and Ben away. Get as far from this cursed place as you can. Promise me." Tears streamed down Elara's face, hot and futile. She saw the love and the desperate hope in her father's eyes. The sacrifice wasn't just for Ben. It was for her and Martha to have a chance. She nodded, the motion tearing something inside her. Silas outlined the grim ritual. Thomas would walk the old path towards Moira's keep at midnight. He would carry nothing but a single white candle, a symbol of life offered. He would call her name 3 times at the Sentinel Oak. He would not look back. The offering had to be willing, and it had to be made on her unholy ground. Midnight approached, cloaked in a silence deeper than any before. The usual sounds of the woods were utterly absent, replaced by a heavy, waiting stillness. Thomas hugged Martha, a long, desperate embrace filled with unspoken words. He kissed Ben's burning forehead. Then he turned to Elara, pulling her into a crushing hug. "Be strong, my brave girl. Look after them." His voice cracked. He took the candle Silas had prepared. Its wax mixed with grave dirt and vervain. Silas murmured, to ensure she tasted the sacrifice. Thomas lit it. The flame burned unnaturally still and white in the windless night. Without another word, he walked towards the tree line, towards the path leading up to the hill and the brooding keep. He didn't look back. They watched the pinprick of light move steadily away, swallowed by the oppressive darkness of the woods. Martha collapsed, sobbing silently. Elara stood rigid, her fists clenched, every fiber of her being screaming to run after him, to fight what she had promised. They waited. Seconds stretched into minutes, into an eternity. The silence pressed down like a physical weight. Then, from the direction of the Sentinel Oak, came a sound that froze the blood in their veins. It wasn't a scream. It was a wet, tearing sound, mixed with a horrible, gurgling sigh of satisfaction, a sigh that seemed to echo through the trees, carried on a sudden, icy wind that smelled of damp earth and old blood. The white light of the candle vanished, snuffed out instantly. A moment later, Ben stirred in Martha's arms. His fever broke like a shattered dam. He took a deep, ragged breath, his eyes fluttering open, clear for the first time in days. He looked around, confused. "Mama, Elara, where's Papa?" Martha let out a choked sob, burying her face in Ben's hair. Elara stared into the impenetrable darkness where the light had died, a cold, hollow void opening up inside her where her heart had been. The offering had been accepted. The price had been paid. The path was momentarily clear. But the cost was a wound that would never heal. And as she helped her mother and brother gather their meager belongings to flee, Elara knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would return. She would find the source. She would break Granny Moira. Not for the village, for her father. The sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. It would be the fuel for her vengeance. Flight was a blur of terror and grief, guided by Silas, who moved with an unnerving familiarity through the moonless dark. They skirted the edge of the blight-tainted land and plunged into the deeper, all the part of the Grimshaw Woods. The path Silas chose was no path at all, but a winding route through dense thickets, over moss-slick boulders, and under gnarled branches that clawed at their clothes like skeletal fingers. The air here was thick, cold, and carried the constant, faint scent of decay and something else, something ancient and watchful. Ben, weak but lucid, clung to Martha, his eyes wide with fear, constantly looking back. Martha moved like an automaton, her face a mask of shock, her tears dried up, replaced by a terrifying emptiness. Elara carried the weight of her father's sacrifice, a cold stone of fury and purpose burning in her chest, cutting through the paralyzing grief. Silas led the way, his staff tapping softly, his eyes scanning the oppressive darkness. "Stay close," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't touch the stones with the spiral marks. Don't look too long at the shadows that don't move with the wind. And whatever you hear, ignore it. It's the woods trying to lead you astray. Or her." The warnings proved necessary. Whispers began soon after they left the vicinity of the village. Not the thin, rasping voice of Granny Moira, but deeper, guttural murmurs that seemed to come from the earth itself, from the twisted trunks of the trees. They spoke in a language Elara didn't know, but the intent was clear. Hunger, malice, a predatory curiosity. Shadows detached themselves from larger pools of darkness, forming fleeting, impossible shapes. Hunched figures with too many limbs, eyes that glowed like embers before vanishing. Cold spots moved through the air, making them shiver violently. Ben whimpered, burying his face in Martha's shoulder. "The bad things. Mama, they're talking. Shh, Ben." Martha murmured, her voice flat, devoid of comfort. "Just shadows." But they weren't just shadows. Silas stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. Ahead, partially obscured by hanging moss, stood a crude stone archway. The stones were covered in deep, unnatural grooves, not carved but scratched by something massive. The ground around it was bare and stained dark. A palpable sense of wrongness radiated from it, a pressure against the skin threshold. Silas breathed, marked by the old ones. Moira's pack keeps them mostly beyond, but her influence weakens the veil that's deep in her domain. "Cross, quickly. Don't linger." As they hurried past the arch, Elara felt an icy chill pierce her to the bone. She heard a sound like massive stones grinding together deep underground, and a wave of psychic pressure washed over her, filled with images of crushing darkness and insatiable hunger. She gasped, stumbling. Silas grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. "Don't listen. Keep moving." They ran, the whispers rising to angry snarls behind them. Something heavy crashed through the undergrowth nearby, unseen but terrifyingly close. The air vibrated with a low, subsonic growl that made their teeth ache. After what felt like hours, the woods began to thin slightly. The oppressive darkness lifted marginally, revealing a landscape of grotesque beauty, giant, bioluminescent fungi pulsed with sickly green and purple light, illuminating twisted trees whose roots formed cages around crumbling stone altars. Petrified figures, not stone but wood turned hard as iron by some unnatural process, stood frozen in poses of terror or supplication. This was a place where nature had been warped by the same evil that sustained Granny Moira. Silas stopped near a relatively clear area dominated by a massive, lightning-blasted oak. Its trunk was split open, revealing a hollow filled with dark water that reflected no light. "We rest here, briefly, beyond that ridge." He pointed towards a steep incline covered in thorny brambles that seemed to writhe slowly. "Lies the valley of the Black Chapel, the source of her power. We cannot reach it tonight. The thorns guard it jealously. They'll snare the soul before they snag the flesh." Elara looked towards the ridge. The thorns weren't just sharp. They seemed to drip a dark, viscous substance, and tiny. Needle-like mouths opened and closed along their lengths. The air above them shimmered with a faint, greasy heat. What is the source, Silas? You have to tell me now. Silas leaned against the dead oak, looking impossibly weary. Centuries passed before Moira. This land was sacred, but also vulnerable. Things slumbered beneath it. Things that hunger for the warmth of life, for the chaos of mortal souls. They are the old ones. The nameless terrors Moira's pack keeps slumbering. The Black Chapel wasn't always a ruin. It was a place of power, built on the convergence of ley lines. You might call them earth energy, but the energy was tainted by what sleeps below. He gestured towards the hollow in the oak. The first guardians tried to contain it. They failed. Moira, she was different, ambitious, desperate, perhaps. She didn't try to contain the tainted power. She stole it, used the forbidden ritual to bind a fragment of that sleeping terror's essence, not its mind, but its raw, corrupting vitality, into a relic, a vessel. That vessel is hidden within the chapel ruins. It's what sustains her, what makes her undying. She feeds the relic's stolen life force, and it feeds her perverse immortality. But it also anchors the pact. Destroy the relic, and Moira's power fails, but so does the barrier holding back the old ones. Elara stared at him, the enormity of the choice crashing down on her. Destroy the relic, kill Moira, but unleash horrors potentially worse than the undying crone, or leave Moira in power, condemning Black Hollow and countless others to be her prey. Her father's face flashed in her mind. There has to be a way to destroy it without breaking the pact. Silas shook his head slowly. The relic is the pact's anchor. Girl, it's the stolen power that forms the barrier. Shatter it, and the barrier shatters. Moira understood the monstrous calculus. Her evil was the lesser one. She became the guardian monster to keep out the devouring gods. A cold resolve settled over Elara. The choice was unthinkable, but her path was clear. She couldn't let Moira continue. Not after her father. Not after Timothy. Old Man Peters, countless others. The villagers' bargain was a slow death sentence. If the old ones came, there was a problem for later. Or perhaps it was the reckoning Black Hollow deserved for its centuries of cowardly appeasement. We go to the chapel at first light, she stated, her voice cold iron. We destroy the relic. Silas looked at her, a flicker of something like respect in his ancient eyes, mixed with profound sorrow. Then you must be the one to wield the tool, Elara Finch, for the relic can only be shattered by a weapon forged in sacrifice and hardened by hate. You carry both now. He pointed a gnarled finger not at her hand, but at her chest. Your father's life, willingly given. Your own burning fury. That is the blade. You just need to find the way to strike. As the first gray light of a poisoned dawn filtered through the twisted canopy, Elara looked towards the thorn-choked ridge guarding the valley of the Black Chapel. The thorns seemed to writhe more eagerly, sensing her intent. The final leg of their journey would be the most perilous, and beyond the thorns waited not just Granny Moira's stronghold, but the source of her power, and the key to unleashing an even greater terror upon the world. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, but the cold fire of vengeance in her heart burned hotter. The thorn barrier wasn't just a wall. It was a living, hungry entity. As Silas guided Elara, Martha, and bent towards the ridge at first light, the brambles seemed to coil and writhe like a nest of awakened serpents. The air above them shimmered with that greasy heat, distorting the view of the valley beyond. A glimpse of crumbling black stone structures huddled in perpetual shadow. The thorns dripped their viscous, dark fluid, hissing faintly where it hit the blight-scorched earth. There's a way through, Silas rasped, his voice tight with tension. An old pilgrim path, Forgotten but not gone. Used for darker purposes now. Follow my steps exactly. Touch nothing. Look only at the ground before you. The thorns crave distraction. Fierce souls. He led them to a section where the thorns seemed slightly less dense, though no less menacing. A narrow, winding gap snaked through the monstrous vegetation, barely wide enough for a person. The ground within the gap was littered with bones. Animal, mostly, but some disturbingly human-sized. Picked clean and bleached white. The air inside the passage was thick, cloying, smelling of decay and ozone. Go quickly. One at a time. Martha, you first with Ben. Hold him tight. Cover his eyes if you can. Straight through. Do not stop. No matter what you hear or feel. Silas's instructions were clipped. Urgent. Martha, her face still numb with shock, but driven by primal maternal instinct, clutched Ben to her chest. She took a shuddering breath and plunged into the thorny corridor. Ben whimpered, burying his face in her neck. Elara watched, her heart hammering, as her mother moved with surprising speed, vanishing into the shifting shadows within the brambles. For a terrifying moment, there was silence. Then, Martha emerged on the other side, stumbling into the valley, Ben still safe in her arms. She didn't look back, pulling Ben further away from the thorns. Your turn, girl, Silas said to Elara. Remember, eyes down. Move fast. Your fury is your shield, but speed is your armor here. Elara nodded, the cold stone of vengeance in her chest hardening. She fixed her gaze on the path of bones, took a deep breath of the foul air, and ran. The thorns seemed to reach for her, whispering voices, chillingly familiar. Her father's voice calling her name in pain, Ben's voice screaming for help, echoed from the writhing walls of vegetation, cold. Invisible fingers brushed her skin. A thorn lashed out, snagging her sleeve, tearing the fabric and drawing a thin line of blood. She ignored it, ignored the whispers, ignored the sudden, intense feeling of vertigo and the chilling sensation of something vast. An ancient noticing her passage, she focused only on the path, on putting one foot in front of the other, on the dim light at the end of the tunnel. She burst out onto the slope leading down into the valley, gasping. Martha and Ben were a few yards away, Martha rocking Ben, who was crying softly. The valley itself was a desolate bowl. The ground was cracked and barren, covered in a layer of fine, gray ash that muffled all sound. Jagged spires of black rock jutted from the earth like broken teeth, and at the center stood the black chapel. It was less a chapel and more jagged wound in the landscape, built from the same unnaturally dark stone as Moira's keep. It was partially collapsed. Its remaining walls leaned precariously, carved with faded, unsettling symbols that seemed to writhe when looked at directly. There were no windows, only gaping holes like empty eye sockets. A massive, arched entrance yawned open, leading into impenetrable darkness, a palpable aura of decay, ancient malice, and raw, corrupted power pulse from the structure, a physical pressure against Elara's skin. This was the heart of the infection, the source. Silas emerged moments later, looking even more haggard. He leaned heavily on his staff, his breath ragged. The thorns, they grow restless. We haven't much time. She knows we're here. He gestured towards the chapel. The relic is within, deep within, guarded by the last remnants of the chapel's true guardians. Twisted by the blight, and Moiras will enter her final protectors. As they approached the colossal entrance, the silence became absolute. The ash swallowed their footsteps. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of ozone and old blood. The darkness within the archway seemed alive, swallowing the weak gray light from the ash-choked sky. Elara drew the small, symbol-etched knife Silas had given her long ago. It felt pitifully inadequate. How do we find it? How do I wield my anger? She felt the fury, a burning coal in her chest. But it was formless, desperate. You'll know when you see it, Silas said cryptically, his eyes fixed on the dark maw. The relic is corruption. Your father's sacrifice. Your pure hatred for what took him, that is its antithesis. Focus that, pour it into the strike. But first, we must survive the Guardians. They stepped across the threshold. Darkness enveloped them, thick and suffocating. Silas muttered something, and the symbols on his staff glowed with a faint, sickly green light, barely illuminating a few feet ahead. The interior was a cavernous ruin. Fallen pillars lay like the bones of giants. The floor was uneven, littered with rubble and more bones. The walls soared upwards into darkness, covered in frescoes depicting scenes of cosmic horror, tentacled entities consuming stars, landscapes of flesh and bone, figures writhing in eternal torment. A dry, skittering sound echoed from the darkness ahead. Then another, and another. Shapes detached themselves from the deeper shadows. They were humanoid, roughly, but horribly distorted. Their limbs were elongated and jointed wrong, ending in sharp, bony claws. Their skin was gray, leathery and cracked, like old bark, revealing glimpses of pulsing black veins beneath. Where faces should have been, there were only masses of knotted, dark roots, twitching and writhing. They moved with jerky, insectal grace, surrounding the intruders, locking the way deeper into the chapel, blighted guardians. One lunged, unnervingly, fast. Silas swung his staff, the glowing end striking the creature's root face. It shrieked, a sound like tearing roots, and recoiled, smoke rising from the point of impact. The light. It hurts them, but there are too many, he yelled. Elara slashed with her knife as another guardian swiped at her. The blade bit into the leathery skin, drawing a bead of black, viscous fluid. The creature hissed but didn't slow. Martha screamed, clutching Ben, as a third guardian scuttled towards them on all fours like a grotesque spider. Panic threatened to overwhelm Elara. The guardians were closing in, their root faces twitching hungrily. She thought of her father walking into the dark, candle held high. She thought of Ben, terrified. The cold fury ignited into white-hot rage. It wasn't just anger. It was a focused, righteous need to destroy. She didn't just slash. She thrust, pouring every ounce of her grief, her love for her father, her terror for Ben, her hatred for Moira into the blade. She aimed not for the body, but for the writhing root mass of the guardian's face. The knife sank deep, not just physically. There was a flash, not of light, but of pure, cold negation. The guardian froze. The roots composing its face blackened, withered, and crumbled to dust in an instant. The body collapsed, lifeless and inert. Silas stared, momentarily stunned. Yes, Elara, that's it. The relic's power sustains them. Your will, your sacrifice fuel. Hatred disrupts it. Strike true, aim for the roots. Elara became a whirlwind of focused vengeance. She moved with desperate speed, dodging claws, weaving between the jerky attacks. Each thrust of her knife wasn't just metal-piercing flesh. It was an act of defiance, a fragment of her soul's fury directed against the corruption. Guardians fell before her, crumbling into piles of desiccated bark and dust where the root core was destroyed. Silas fought beside her, his staff flaring, keeping others at bay, protecting Martha and Ben who, huddled behind a fallen pillar, thought it was brutal, exhausting. Elara's arm ached. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Black ichor splattered her clothes and skin, burning cold where it touched. But she pressed on, driven by the cold fire within. They carved a path through the guardians, deeper into the chapel's heart, towards a massive, crumbling archway at the far end. Beyond it, faintly pulsing with a deep, malevolent purple light, lay the inner sanctum. The source of the pulse drew Elara like a moth. The relic was near, and so, she knew with icy certainty, was Granny Moira. The archway led into a circular chamber, smaller than the ruined nave but radiating an almost unbearable pressure. The air crackled with static, thick with the smell of ozone, grave dirt, and a coppery tang like old blood. The walls here were smoother, carved with intricate, spiraling patterns that seemed to writhe and shift in the dim, pulsing light emanating from the chamber's center. There, atop a crude stone altar stained black with centuries of unspeakable offerings, rested the relic. It wasn't what Elara expected. It wasn't a jeweled crown or a glowing orb. It was a heart, a human heart, impossibly preserved, but blackened as if charred. It pulsed rhythmically like a living thing, each beat sending out a wave of that deep, sickly purple light that illuminated the chamber. Thick, black veins like solidified corruption snaked out from it, burrowing into the stone of the altar and deep into the floor beneath the chapel. This was the stolen essence Silas spoke of, the bound fragment of an old one's power, the engine of Moira's undeath, the anchor of the pack. Standing before the altar, her back to them, was a figure, taller than Elara remembered, impossibly straight for something so ancient. Granny Moira. She wore tattered robes that might once have been fine, now stained and rotten. Her long, gray hair hung lank and greasy. She didn't turn as they entered, seemingly entranced by the pulsating heart. "You came," she rasped, her voice no longer thin, but deep, resonant, and thick with the power she fed upon. It vibrated in Elara's bones. "Defiance has a flavor, child. Sharp, bitter, delicious." She slowly turned. Elara stifled a gasp. Moira's face was a horror. The skin was stretched taut over sharp bones, gray in line, but her eyes, they burned with an inner violet fire that matched the relic's light. Her mouth was a lipless gash filled with needle-sharp, blackened teeth. But the most terrifying change was her hands. Her fingers were impossibly long, ending in sharp, obsidian claws that seemed to drip shadow. She radiated an aura of ancient, malevolent power, a stark contrast to the decaying crone of village tales. This was the undying in her true, empowered form. "Father," Elara choked out, the word ripped from her throat by rage and grief. Moira smiled, a grotesque stretching of her lipless maw. "Thomas Finch, a morsel, a satisfying one." His fear was exquisite, his life force potent. It fed the heart well. She gestured a clawed hand towards the pulsating organ. "It feeds me." She took a step forward, her presence pressing down like a physical weight. "And now you bring me more. The tender boy and the fiery girl. A feast to sustain me for another century." Silas stepped forward, staff raised, its symbols flaring weakly against Moira's overwhelming aura. "It ends, Moira. The pact is broken. The old ones stir." Moira laughed, a sound like stones grinding in a tomb. "Broken by whom? You, old fool, or this whelp?" Clutching her little knife, her burning violet eyes fixed on Elara. "Your defiance amused me, child. Your father's sacrifice moved me to hunger. But you are nothing, a spark against the eternal dark." Elara felt the crushing weight of Moira's presence, the millennia of stolen life, the vast, corrupted power radiating from the heart. Doubt threatened to drown her fury. How could her grief, her anger, possibly stand against this? Then she saw Ben, clinging to Martha, his eyes wide with terror, but alive. Because of her father, because of the sacrifice Moira had so casually consumed. She saw Silas, ancient and frail, yet standing defiant, She saw the heart, pulsing with stolen vitality. Her father's vitality, Timothy Miller's, countless others. The cold fire roared back, hotter, brighter, purer than before. It wasn't just hatred. It was the absolute, unwavering refusal of this abomination. No, Elara whispered, then louder, her voice ringing in the chamber, surprising even herself. I'm my father's daughter. I'm his will. I'm his sacrifice. She raised a small knife, not towards Moira, but towards the pulsing heart on the altar. And this ends now. Moira's burning eyes narrowed. For the first time, a flicker of something besides hunger and amusement crossed her monstrous face. Annoyance, foolish child, touch the heart, and you doom this world. The old ones will rise. Maybe, Elara spat, taking a step towards the altar, her eyes locked on the blackened heart. But you won't be here to see it. She poured everything into that step. Her love for her father, her terror for Ben, her grief for Timothy, her fury at the village's cowardice, her hatred for this undying parasite. She focused it all, sharpened it to a single, crystalline point of intent. Shatter. Moira shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury that shook the crumbling chapel. Dust rained from the ceiling. She lunged, a blur of tattered robes in obsidian, claws, aiming to rip Elara apart before she could reach the altar. Silas threw himself forward, not attacking Moira, but slamming his staff onto the floor directly in her path. The symbols on the staff flared with a blinding, desperate white light. Moira recoiled, snarling as the light seared her shadowy form, momentarily halting her charge. Elara, now, Silas roared, straining against the staff, which began to crack under Moira's glare. It was the opening Elara needed. She ignored the lashing claws, the suffocating aura, the terrifying proximity of the ancient evil. She focused only on the pulsing, corrupted heart. She saw the veins burrowing into the stone, the stolen life force flowing through them. She saw the relic not as a heart, but as the cancer it was. She raised the knife, not as a blade, but as a conduit for the focused torrent of her soul's defiance, her sacrifice-forged weapon. With a cry that echoed her father's final act of love, she plunged the knife not into the heart but through one of the thick, black corruption veins anchoring it to the altar. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The knife didn't just cut, it unleashed the pent-up force of Elara's will, a pure, white-hot blast of negation fueled by sacrifice and righteous fury. The corruption vein exploded in a shower of black ichor and dark vapor. The connection severed violently. The heart gave a single, massive, agonized throb. The deep purple light flared blindingly bright, then flickered wildly. A deafening crack echoed through the chamber. Then another, spiderwebbing across the blackened surface of the heart itself. Moira screamed, not in rage this time, but in pure, soul-rending agony. Her form convulsed. The violet fire in her eyes guttered and dimmed. Her gray skin began to sag, then crack like old parchment. Her obsidian claws crumbled at the tips. No! The pact, the barrier. She shrieked, her voice suddenly thin and reedy, the resonant power draining away. Silas staggered back as Moira's power waned, his staff sputtering. He looked not triumphant, but terrified, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, then the floor. It's happening. The binding is broken. They feel it. The chapel began to shake violently. Great chunks of black stone fell from the ceiling. The floor beneath the altar heaved and cracked open, revealing a terrifying, fathomless darkness below. From that darkness rose a wave of pure, primal terror, a psychic scream of awakening hunger from something vast and unspeakably ancient. The old ones were stirring. Moira collapsed to her knees, her body rapidly desiccating, crumbling inwards. Centuries of stolen life fled her all at once. She raised a trembling, skeletal hand, not towards Elara, but towards the cracking heart, her lipless mouth working soundlessly, her burning violet eyes locked onto Elara's one last time, filled not with hatred but with a terrifying, ancient knowing. Then, with a final, dry rattle, she dissolved into a pile of grey ash and crumbling bone, her tattered robes collapsing atop the remains. Granny Moira was finally dead, but the shaking intensified. The cracks in the floor widened. The darkness beneath the chapel pulsed with a deep, rhythmic thrum that vibrated in their teeth. The heart, now dark and inert, fell from the crumbling altar and vanished into the abyss below. "We have to go," Silas yelled, grabbing Martha and Ben, pulling them towards the entrance. "The valley is collapsing. The barrier is gone." Elara stared at the pile of ash that had been Moira, then at the yawning chasm where the heart had fallen, the wave of ancient, devouring hunger rising from the depths. She had won her vengeance. She had shattered the Undying. But at what cost? The pact was broken. The guardian monster was dead, and the devouring gods were waking up. Escape from the valley was a nightmare of falling rock and rising terror. The ground buckled and split beneath their feet as they scrambled back through the ruined nave, dodging collapsing pillars and widening fissures that vented gusts of freezing, foul-smelling air. Behind them, the black chapel groaned and collapsed inwards, swallowed by the growing chasm that pulsed with the terrifying rhythm of awakening giants. The psychic pressure was overwhelming, a vast, alien consciousness stirring from eons of slumber, radiating pure, insatiable hunger that scraped against their minds. They burst out of the chapel entrance just as the entire structure vanished into the earth with a final, grinding roar. The valley floor was a churning chaos of collapsing earth and rising plumes of ash and dark vapor. The thorn barrier on the ridge writhed in agony, its vines blackening and withering as the unnatural energy sustaining it vanished. "Don't look. Back. Run," Silas bellowed, shoving them towards the slope leading away from the valley. "They're waking. They'll seek life. Any life." They ran, stumbling through the ash, lungs burning. The unnatural silence of the Grimshaw woods was shattered. The trees themselves seemed to scream, their roots tearing free from the convulsing earth. Strange, discordant howls echoed from the depths. Not wolves, but sounds of alien fury and awakening hunger. The sky, visible through the thrashing canopy, churned with unnatural, bruise-colored clouds. They reached the edge of the woods near Silas's hut. Black Hollow lay below, shrouded in an unnatural twilight. But the village wasn't silent. Panicked, screams rose on the wind. Strange lights, not fire, but pulsing, sickly glows of green and purple, flared in the streets. Shapes moved in the shadows, not Moira's blighted guardians, but things darker, more fluid, more wrong. The old ones weren't fully risen yet, but their influence, their minions, were already seeping through the broken barrier, drawn to the concentration of mortal fear and life. Martha collapsed, sobbing, clutching Ben, who stared wide-eyed at the chaos unfolding below. "What have we done?" Martha whispered, horror dawning through her shock. "We ended a monster," Elara said, her voice flat, devoid of triumph. She stared at the village, at the spreading terror, and unleashed what she kept caged. The weight of it settled on her, crushing. Her vengeance felt hollow, ashy, like Moira's. Remains, Silas leaned against his hut, his face ashen, watching the descent of chaos. The pact is broken. The warden is gone. The prison doors are opening. Black Hollow is just the first course. He looked at Elara, his ancient eyes filled with a terrible weariness. "You did what you felt you must. Girl, for your father, for justice. The consequences were always part of the price." Elara looked at Ben, trembling but alive. She looked at her mother, broken but breathing. Her father's sacrifice had bought them this. It bought them life, but at the cost of how many others? The screams from the village intensified. A column of pure darkness, shot through with sickly light, erupted near the church spire, twisting into a monstrous, tentacled silhouette against the bruised sky before dissolving into a shower of corrosive rain. "We can't stay here," Elara said, the cold practicality of survival cutting through the horror. "We need to get as far away as possible." Silas nodded grimly. "Aye. Take the old drover's road south. Avoid the main paths. Move fast. Move quiet. The hunger spreads." He rummaged in his hut, handing Elara a worn leather pouch. "Food, herbs. What little protection I can offer now is weak against what's coming. Go, now." There were no goodbyes. Silas turned back to face the crumbling woods, the rising darkness, the screams of the village, a sentinel watching the end he had long feared. Elara took Ben's hand, helped Martha to her feet, and they fled south, leaving Black Hollow and the hungry earth behind. The journey was a blur of fear and exhaustion. They traveled by night, hid by day, moving through a world that felt fundamentally changed. Strange lights flickered on distant hills. Unnatural storms raged without rain. Whispers rode the wind, whispers in languages no human throat could form. They saw things, fleeting glimpses of impossible shapes moving through the forests. Patches of land where the very earth seemed to bubble and bleed dark ichor. The old ones were stretching their limbs, testing the boundaries of their newly accessible world. Years passed. They found refuge in a bustling port city far to the south, anonymity their shield. Martha never truly recovered, haunted by Thomas's sacrifice and the horrors she'd witnessed. She died quietly in her sleep 5 winters later. Ben grew into a quiet, serious young man, the shadows of Black Hollow and the hungry earth forever darkening his eyes. He rarely spoke of it, but he had nightmares, vivid, terrifying nightmares of roots and darkness, and a voice that wasn't quite his own whispering. From the earth, Elara changed her name. She worked. She survived. But the cold, fire never died. It banked, but it burned. She watched the world. She read newspapers from afar, reports of strange plagues, unexplained disappearances in remote areas, geological anomalies, and bizarre cults worshipping Earth Mothers and Deep Fathers became unsettlingly common. The world was changing. Granny Moira's death hadn't brought peace. It had opened a door that couldn't be closed. Her vengeance had unleashed a slow, creeping apocalypse. One rainy afternoon, Elara, now Eliza Carter, sat in a cramped boarding house room. Ben, now Benjamin, was out at work. She picked up a discarded newspaper. A small article on page 7 caught her eye. Unsettling events at Ravens Crag Orphanage authorities are investigating disturbing reports from Ravens Crag Orphanage, a remote institution situated near the Blackwood Forest. Matron Agnes Bell reports several children exhibiting unusual sleepwalking episodes, speaking in strange, guttural tongues, and displaying an unnerving fascination with the foundations of the old building. One child, a young boy named Samuel, reportedly told staff that Granny in the walls was teaching him songs about roots and deep, sweet sleep. Local folklore mentions an earthbound crone spirit said to inhabit the region. Elara's blood ran cold. Not Moira. Moira was Ash, but something else. Something new, or perhaps something very old. Finding a new conduit, the corruption Moira had embodied, the hunger she had both exploited and contained. It didn't die with her. It was finding new cracks in the world, new vulnerable souls to whisper to. The good, the monstrous protection, was gone. The evil remained, shape-shifting, seeping into the foundations of new places, whispering to new children. She folded the newspaper slowly, her knuckles white. The ash of Moira might be scattered, but the legacy of her evil, and the greater evil she had guarded against, was very much alive. It wasn't the hungry earth, the whispering woods, the troubled dreams of orphans far away. It was a legacy written in blood and sacrifice, a chilling testament to the fact that some monsters never truly die. They just change form. And the world, unwittingly, was learning the terrible cost of killing the guardian at the gate outside. The rain drummed against the window pane. Somewhere, deep beneath the foundations of cities and towns, in the forgotten places of the world, the earth grumbled with ancient, restless hunger. The end was just another kind of beginning.